Yes, well, hello there, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations, episode 281. And I have to say, I'm a little unbalanced today, and I'll tell you why. I'm not wearing my headphones. I cannot hear what you're hearing. I'm assuming that the sound is good. I'll tell you why I don't have my headphones. Here they are. My Sony studio headphones that I love. Look at this. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, you imagination connoisseurs. Gilbert, for whatever reason, bit my headphone wire in half. I have no idea. He's always had access to it. He's never done anything remotely like that before. Well, no, look, I've even got flyaways on my hair. I have no headphones, so bear with me. It's a little weird not doing the show with headphones on. I'm just going to assume that it's all okay. Anyway, Robservations, show about something, number 281, brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And as you know, if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can get 20% off your order if you punch in PGS. For this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. It is very strange that I don't have headphones on. It's very disconcerting, ladies and gentlemen. I can't tell what's happening. Anyway, I hope you can tell what's happening. It is Thursday. I was not on the John Campea show today. Got a lot going on. Our short film, Skyfighter, that Lucas Kendall wrote and directed, that I edited, is uploaded to the Dust Network. It is going to debut worldwide on the Dust Network. If you have the Dust channel on your Roku or you watch Dust on YouTube, our short film, Skyfighter, was picked up by them and for worldwide distribution, and you can see it on January 26th, which is very exciting. That means it's all put to bed. I love putting these projects to bed. Tango Shalom, Skyfighter, it's amazing. Now I need new projects, people. I need new projects. You know why I need new projects? Because believe it or not, I'll just flat out say it. I'm a producer. I am. I've produced both Agent Cody Banks movies. I was one of the producers. I turned out to be a co-producer. And as I've told a lot of you before, I am the only single card credited producer on both Cody Banks movies and, of course, the main titles. Single card. Even Madonna and Jason Alexander had to share their cards on the movie. I did not. I also, of course, produced The Hills Run Red. Hopefully, I've got some exciting news about The Hills Run Red coming to you in, well, probably not before the end of the year, but into the new year. I've got exciting news about The Hills Run Red, which I will share with you later. And of course, right now I'm producing Tango Shalom. But especially after I was on a Midnight's Edge podcast last night, and I was thinking about the fact that I don't think a lot of people understand what a producer does. Hell, I've met producers that don't understand what producers do. So I figured I'd talk a little bit about, first of all, what does a producer do? I've talked about it before on this channel, but I'm going to talk about it again today. There are different kinds of producers, and certainly producers in television and producers in motion pictures aren't the same. They do different things a little differently. So I want to start out, first of all, with television, because I want to get that out of the way. So obviously, what are some of the jobs that producers do from the get-go? Well, a producer finds material. Like if you want to be a movie producer, you have to have a movie to produce. So producers are always on the lookout for material. They might find a script, they might find a book, they might find a filmmaker, and they decide that they would like to passionately decide that they want to make whatever it is into a film. Now, in the case of Agent Cody Banks, at the time, I had two partners and myself acquired a screenplay from a limo driver, Agent Cody Banks. Well, he'd never written anything before, and that writer had a good idea, but we knew that his script wasn't in a good enough shape in which that we could sell it. So what we had to do was, once we acquired the script from him as producers, we then found, well, we got two of my friends, Ashley Edward Miller and Zach Stentz. They have written Thor and X-Men First Class, but before they had done that, they were TV writers. They wrote on Andromeda. They wrote on The Twilight Zone. Zach recently wrote a movie called Rim of the World that McGee directed. Ashley was on Black Sails. But together they wrote X-Men First Class and Thor. But before that, we hired them to rewrite. It was their first feature writing assignment that sold. We had them rewrite the original writer's script for Agent Cody Banks. And their draft was so good. By the way, it's so good, I really wish we'd shot that draft. But what we did then was we were able to shop that script around, and through many different a lot of stories I could tell you, we got it eventually to MGM. And MGM acquired Agent Cody Banks along with various other producers that we'd brought on and producers they'd put on, but they got it from us. And the movie got made. So that's something a producer does. In the case of myself with Tango Shalom, which is the movie I'm producing now, I came on to the film late. So this is unusual. I was originally hired as an editor, but the film was made for such a low budget, and I had a lot of ideas on how we could improve it, how we could do some nips and tucks and some reshooting and things we could do to really, really turn it into a polished and professional piece of work. And so I became a producer on that project. Now, I had a lot of say once I came on to post, not just editorially, but Gabe Bologna, the director, and I really worked in tandem, hand in hand, because I've made films, I've directed before. So it was a really great partnership between the two of us. And I think we did something that was pretty amazing. So I wasn't involved in the production or the financing of Tango Shalom. I came in later, and I was made a producer because of my contribution. Now, for television, an executive producer on TV, on a TV show, is the most powerful person on the show, because usually the executive producers are also the show creators. If you're created by, you then become an executive producer. And on television, an executive producer, for the most part, oversees everything about the show. They craft the show, they cast the show, they edit the show. After a director on television comes in, he does his edit, and then the director leaves. And it is the producers, usually the executive producers who created the show, the showrunners, that finish editing an episode. So it's different. On a feature film, an executive producer is usually somebody that arranged for the financing. They either came from a financing entity, they put up the money themselves. So an executive producer on a feature film, for the most part, arranges for whatever monies are needed to come into play. They are not involved the way an executive producer on a TV show is involved. They do not usually go into the edit bay. They are not calling any kind of creative shots. Once they finance the movie, they stand back and they let everybody else do the work. Now, on a movie, there are different kinds of producers. Certainly, we have the executive producers, but they're not involved in production. There's a line producer, and a line producer is really in charge of the day-to-day operation of a production. The men, the materials, the personnel and the materials, where they're supposed to be, how they're going to get there. That's what a great line producer does. A line producer's making sure the permits are taken care of, making sure that if they're shooting on location, all of that is taken care of. All the transportation gets to go where it's supposed to go. All of that. That's what a line producer does. Now, there is also, look, if there's Gilbert, he wants to know what producers do. Gilbert produces. He produces a lot of things that I have to clean up every day. Right, Gilbert? That's right. You good, buddy? But anyway, so then you have the producers of the movie. Now, there's a lot of different producers when it comes to movies. There is a producer that oversees, a working producer that's above the line producer, that's there every step of the way, that is really overseeing the production, the watchful eye of a working producer. And that producer is calling the shots at the very highest level, interacts with money people, interacts with the line producer, makes sure that the cast is all squared away. Really, a working producer is also in charge of the day-to-day production, but even beyond, also deals with cast, deals with the director, that kind of a thing. A line producer who's in charge of moving materials and moving personnel is not really going to step up and get in the director's face. The line producer reports to the producer, and then the producer does what they need to do. But a great producer is also there on set every step of the way. And a great producer is like, if the director, say you're Steven Spielberg, and you want to make a movie like Empire of the Sun. When you're making a movie like Empire of the Sun and you're shooting something like The Fall of Shanghai, you're looking at The Fall of Shanghai, and it's difficult. Imagine you're in a foreign country, you have hundreds of thousands of extras. They all have to be clothed. You need period cars. You need all kinds of things. And a great producer works with a line producer. That's an enormous job. It's like fighting a military campaign. So a producer needs to handle all of that. I mean, there's so many moving parts, so much to do. And a great producer is very clever in how they approach these kinds of things. And it's very creative. So a working producer can be very creative, and a director knows what they want to shoot. A director knows, well, at this point in the story, this is happening. Christian Bale is going to be separated from his parents, and then he's going to get lost in the crowds and all that. And this is how I'm going to shoot it. And if a great director, like say Steven Spielberg, who's shooting Empire of the Sun, and they're shooting the Fall of Shanghai, you see all of these things. Now, Steven Spielberg isn't involved as a director to figure out, well, how am I going to get all these people here? That's what a good producer does. You know who produced Empire of the Sun? Kathleen Kennedy did. So one of the reasons Kathleen Kennedy started working with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas is she worked in local television in San Diego, and then she was hired. She was a typist on 1941 that came out, the Steven Spielberg film in 1941. 1941 came out in 1979. It was apparent to everybody Kathleen Kennedy was not a good typist, but she had a lot of good production ideas, because you have to be very creative when you're producing a movie to get what you need, to get what the director needs. You have to get it the best way possible and the cheapest way possible. You don't want to spend all of the money that you have on certain scenes. So the idea that a producer on a movie is not creative is, I think, false. I think that idea is false. Now, when a lot of us in the movie pundit or fan community talks about a creative producer, I don't exactly, it kind of irks me, because I don't know what people mean. I don't think most people know what they mean when they say creative producer. I think I know what they think they mean. And a creative producer weighs in on the story that's being told the same way that a writer and a director might. And that is true. There are producers that are very good story people. And remember, if you're a producer that bought a property, bought a book, bought a screenplay, bought a newspaper article, a magazine article, a podcast to turn into something, if you're that guy or that girl, and you've brought the material, you have very distinct creative ideas about what you want done with this material. So I think that's what people think a creative producer is. And then that producer works with the writer, probably hires the writer, and hired the director. So a producer like that is working in tandem with all of those people. At least that's what I guess. And there are definitely producers that are like that. But once that ship has sailed and you've hired your director, you've hired the writer to craft the material, a producer will usually work with the writer before a director is even hired, before they've even financed a project, to get it into shape. So I understand that. And I think most great producers also have a good sense of story. You have to, because if you're trying to provide what a director needs in the proscenium of the frame, you have to really understand the material that you're working on. You have to understand, and you have to anticipate what a director might need in the future. So I think most producers worth their salt are creative producers. Now, there's this wacky thing that I've seen over the years in the industry, and it's usually with people like when you're talking to agents or managers or people that aren't really involved in production, studio executives, even though they can be, but there are sections of the studio that are involved in physical production. But the higher up, the vice presidents that meet with writers and these things, even they don't know as much about physical production as they perhaps should. And they will tell you that what you really need here is a creative producer. To me, when I hear people say that, what you need is a creative producer, or, oh, she's not a creative producer. Those are people who have never worked in production. To me, it's a telltale sign. Or it's a telltale sign of a fan that has heard buzzwords and I've read all these things and I know what producers do. Well, unless you've actually worked in production on many different kinds of movies or TV shows, if you're outside of the industry, it's really difficult to wrap your head around the day-to-day operations of a movie set. I know everybody thinks they can, but there are things that go on. Like whenever I've spoken to people, and I've said this before on the show, what people are like, what is the most important thing a producer needs to know about actually producing a movie? And I say, the first thing a good producer knows is where to get good catering. I've said it before, and people look at me like, what? I go, yeah. Before you even get into producing your show, wherever it's going to be, you better know good caterers. You better know a good craft service person. And everyone looks at me and laughs. I'm like, no, I'm not kidding. Because one of the most important things a good producer can do is know how to feed their crew. Because if you're on a long production, and I guarantee you that a crew, the first thing you need to do is make sure that your crew is happy. And the first way a crew knows if you're going to make them happy as a producer is when they eat. Are they going to have good meals? A crew busts their ass. And they can tell. They can tell on that first meal whether you've got a nice breakfast waiting for them, whether you've got a good lunch. You have half a day to win your crew. Director even has less time, but a producer's got about half a day. I mean, by the time you're into production, usually your crew's gotten to know you via page turns and in pre-production. They know. But the rest of your crew that comes on for the actual production days, you've got to make sure that they believe that you're going to have them taken care of. I mean, you have to know a lot of other things too. And I'm being slightly facetious when I say that, but not really. If you talk to anybody in production, they will tell you they know how good this job's going to be based on two things: how the director acts in the first 2 or 3 hours of the first day of production, and two, how good lunch is. It's true. I mean, there's a lot of other factors, but those are two telltale signs. Now, when I hear that someone like Kathleen Kennedy, and by the way, this is the last video I'm going to ever do about Kathleen Kennedy. There's going to be one other video I might do, but I just find it's amazing to me. I have admired Kathleen Kennedy for a long time. You could not be growing up as a film fan in the 1980s and not learn Kathleen Kennedy, her name, or her husband, Frank Marshall's name, because they were together with Spielberg and working on a lot of his films. And she is one of the greatest movie producers of all time. And I don't know her. I'm not trying to get a job from her. Certainly not these days. But what I don't understand is we as genre fans, we as imagination connoisseurs, half of our love of cinema came out of movies that Kathleen Kennedy produced. And what I find so interesting now is so many of us are so willing to just poo-poo her and talk about, oh, she's not a creative producer, or what does she know, or she's just standing by people who are more creative than she is. Look, No one in Hollywood gets carried along for 3 decades unless they know what they're doing. There's too much money involved, there's too many people involved, and, one of the great things here's something that I discovered when I was working at Warner Brothers when I was young. My first after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when I was working at Warner Brothers, I worked for Bill Young in feature production at Warner Brothers. We oversaw the physical production, so I worked in physical production of all the movies that Warner Brothers made. But I was on the Warner lot for the better part of 3 years, so I saw a lot of what went on in a lot of different departments because I was all over the place. But the thing about female producers, and I think we talk about how men and women should be totally equal. Well, there's something that I have learned over the course of my time working in motion pictures. Men and women are different. Shocking. We're a little different in the way we approach things. And one of the great things about female producers is the way women think is pragmatically. They think pragmatically. Women make fantastic producers. I'll flat out say it. Now, I'm not saying that guys don't make good producers, but I think what's really interesting is when you're working in the arts, and specifically if you're working in motion pictures, you walk in, and I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. When James Cameron was directing Aliens, okay, that movie was made for less than $20 million. They had 6 alien suits to make aliens. You think there's hundreds of aliens. They had 6 alien suits when they made that movie, just 6. So the openings of that movie, the opening scene is when the Narcissus, the Nostromo shuttle has been drifting through space. We don't know it yet, but it's been drifting through space for 57 years. And a salvage crew finds this shuttle adrift where Sigourney Weaver has been in suspended animation for 57 years. And they cut into the ship. And the first thing that you see once the hatchway is opened up, you see a thing on a laser come through, and then a laser sweeps through the interior of the ship. So that's what James Cameron, as the director, he wanted that. But his wife at the time, Gail Ann Hurd, was producing the movie, and she said, Jim, we can't afford a laser. We can't afford it. You can't have it. We just can't afford it. And if you want it, you have to pay for it out of your own pocket. And he did. Because, the thing about you're a director, whether you're a man or a woman directing a movie, you're a dreamer. Your head's in the clouds. You're like, we're going to do this, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be the best shot in the world. Well, good producers will bring you back down to earth. And they will tell you, here's why you can't do that, or they'll offer an alternative. We can't afford this, but you can have that. Like Gail Ann Hurd said, Jim, you can have that laser if you pay for it yourself. Well, I've found, having worked for female executives and worked for female producers, that their pragmatism is very helpful when it comes to making movies, because sometimes they'll pull your head out of the clouds or out of your ass, as the case may be, if you're not thinking pragmatically. I think that's a skill set. No, I'm not saying that men don't have this either, but I'm saying that women, of course, and I think if you want to go all the way back, it comes down to the fact that at the end of the day, the way we were genetically made up, the way we survived as hunter-gatherers, I can only imagine that when Cro-Magnon man or Homo erectus or Homo habilis, whatever we were on the African veldt or something, and some dude was painting a beautiful cave painting and he was consumed by his art, that it was his wife, who has the 3 screaming kids in the back, taps him on the shoulder and goes, honey, this is great. This is terrific artwork you have here, but you need to go out and kill something because these kids need to be fed. And when they're fed, you can get back to your painting. And that's what I think has been going on for tens of thousands of years. And it's something that we should not deny. And I think that women have always made great producers. Now, I'm not saying women can't be douchebags the way guys can be. Sure, they can. I mean, everybody can be an asshole, and that's what happens. But women producers, at least to my experience and in my experience, have been great. I've loved working with them. I've loved working for them, and I think women producers can be the backbone of any great movie or franchise. So Kathleen Kennedy is someone that deserves the respect of every imagination connoisseur that is out there. All of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. And you've heard me say this before. I've said this before. And let's recap. I mean, movies that she's worked on. E.T., Poltergeist, Twilight Zone the movie, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, The Goonies, Back to the Future, Color Purple, Young Sherlock Holmes, An American Tale, Inner Space, Empire of the Sun, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Back to the Future Part 2, Always, Joe versus the Volcano, Back to the Future Part 3, Gremlins 2, Arachnophobia, Cape Fear, Hook, Noises Off, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, The Flintstones, The Bridges of Madison County, The Indian in the Cupboard, The Lost World, Sixth Sense. She produced for M. Night Shyamalan. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. She produced for David Fincher. She produced for Martin Scorsese, obviously. I mean, it goes on and on. Seabiscuit. There's so many movies that she's worked on that she deserves at least our respect, because she's done a lot of work and she's been a great producer. And Kathleen Kennedy has not just stood by while no one else did jobs and just waited till Steven Spielberg was done shooting. No, there's a reason why she's worked her way up. And I dare say she's probably got the best credits of any filmmaker, any female filmmaker, certainly any female producer that's ever worked in Hollywood. So she's demanding of our respect. And in terms of being a creative producer, she's a creative producer. Very much so. Anyway, that brings me to today's topic now. I've gotten a lot of that off my... Please, and by the way, I encourage everybody to ask me questions about the role of a producer, because I can illuminate you. I think more so than a lot of people that are on YouTube in the genre pundit space. But Kim Masters, who is a very reputable writer, and she's been covering the entertainment business for a long time, wrote this article in the Hollywood Reporter yesterday. And some people have reported on it, and I figured I'd report on it too. The article is Star Wars Uncertainty Extends to Kathleen Kennedy's Disney Future. The Lucasfilm chief has a director lined up for a 2022 film, even as she has yet to settle on the direction for the marquee franchise's evolving mythology or her own future. Are there any fans more implacable than Star Wars fans? Probably not. And with the rise of Skywalker, aka Episode 9, set to wrap up the original saga when it opens December 20th, it's fair to say that some are waiting with knives out to see what comes next. The overarching and billion-dollar questions for Disney. Where does the Star Wars universe go from here? Will Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy stay or exit? Will Disney CEO Bob Iger and the film studio chief Alan Horn give her the chance to steer this bulky behemoth into a smooth flight path? And given the rocky recent past filled with fired and sidelined directors and aborted projects, which filmmakers would even dare to take on the next phase of Star Wars? Asked to comment on these topics, Disney has nothing to say. All eyes on Episode 9, please. And Kennedy, who is 66, may be reading into the silence. Asked how long she might stick around in her job, she recently told Rolling Stone, quote, "What happens in the future and how long and how much longer do I do this? I don't know yet. I'm looking at all of that." Kennedy hasn't offered any specifics, but the new Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian, seems to provide a strong hint regarding her ideas about how to plot the future of Star Wars, if she's given the opportunity. Note that those plans involve a very limited role for Marvel Studios chief Kevin Feige, who is set to produce his own film take on the franchise. On November 13th, Disney held a premiere, showing 3 episodes of The Mandalorian at its El Capitan Theater in Hollywood. Unsurprisingly, creator Jon Favreau was the star of the night. Perhaps some of the most lavish praise for the Mandalorian experience came from eccentric filmmaker and Mandalorian actor Werner Herzog, who raved about the cutting-edge technology on display in the series, but his words seem to be freighted with meaning beyond that. What you are creating is an entire universe, Herzog said. This universe is filled with new mythology. Not very often in the cultural history have we had a new mythology, and I find it very significant. Creating a new mythology is, of course, the challenge that Disney faces with Star Wars. I think actually really what their challenge is to continue a mythology that was created 42 years ago and continue it well. Kennedy is an experienced and competent producer, but she is not a creative visionary. She made her name as a producer for creative visionary Steven Spielberg. See, in my mind, I understand what is being said here, but even Kim Masters is saying Kathleen Kennedy is not a creative visionary. I don't think she purports to be a creative visionary. She's a movie producer, and she's a very good movie producer. And a good movie producer has to be creative on a number of different levels. If she wanted to write, she would. If she wanted to direct, she would. But you know what writers and directors need? They need great producers. And she is a great producer. I just want to say that. So who better than Favreau to play a leading role in charting the course? He has fan loyalty. He is as Team Disney as they come, having directed The Jungle Book and The Lion King. He worked with Kennedy on the all-important effort to launch Disney Plus, and having consulted on, executive produced, and acted in Marvel movies, he is also close with Feige. So with or without Kennedy, sources say it seems likely that Favreau will have a lot to say over the future of Star Wars. These sources also say that Kennedy's ideal team includes key roles for Michelle Rejwan, a producer on Episode 9, who I've also talked about on the show, and Lucasfilm's Senior VP of Live Action Development and Production, and Dave Filoni, the veteran animation director and George Lucas protege who directed live action for the first time with 2 episodes of The Mandalorian. Let me point out, it was Kathleen Kennedy's idea that when Favreau pitched The Mandalorian to her, that he team up with Dave Filoni. Do you know why she did that? Because she's creative and she understands what a good producer understands. How do you get the best men and personnel together with the material to create the greatest outcome? She did that. Even if remaining at Lucasfilm is not in the cards for Kennedy, this plan would enable her to trumpet that she has done the job she was hired to do, completing the Skywalker saga, and left the franchise in good hands. But on the movie side, nothing is going to happen fast. Iger already noted that a Star Wars film hiatus on November 7th earnings call. In September, he told the New York Times that Disney, quote, put a little bit too much in the marketplace too fast. Was he the one who pushed to hurry out Solo, a Star Wars story in 2018, despite Kennedy's misgivings? Well, yes. Sources say Kennedy has a film on deck for 2022, but not the one being developed by The Last Jedi filmmaker Rian Johnson. No announcement is planned until January. Kennedy's contract is up in 2021. Contract is up. So whether she will be on the job when this film is completed is not clear. Kennedy insists she's enjoyed running Lucasfilm, but in some ways it's hard to see how. She has had one of the hardest jobs in Hollywood, inventing stories under a white-hot spotlight and dealing in a universe where rabid fans have plenty of ideas, mostly about what they don't want. And she was picked by Lucas before he sold to Disney, not Iger. It's not hard to imagine that Iger would like to install his own choice to head this bauble that cost $4 billion and has generated some headaches since. It's also not hard to imagine that Iger has not enjoyed the negative noise around the franchise, despite the nearly $5 billion in global box office from Disney's 4 installments since 2015. $5 billion in 4 years with 4 movies that she produced. Not a bad track record as far as Hollywood is concerned. Fans were thrilled when the Hollywood Reporter reported that Feige had pitched a Star Wars movie. But for now, his plate is loaded. He is at a pivot point with the end of the Infinity Saga in terms of films. He's taken control of the Marvel characters that previously belonged to Fox, And another Spider-Man movie just plopped into his lap now that Sony Pictures has come to its senses. Feige also is launching shows in rapid sequence for Disney Plus, starting with The Falcon and the Winter Soldier in fall of 2020. And of course, moving him to Star Wars risks tampering with that Marvel magic. But a number of industry observers still believe that Feige, who is 46, is the future. Given his track record, says one film agent, if you're Iger, you've got to figure out a way to use that person. Well, that one film agent, let me tell you, he did figure out a way to use that person. He bought Marvel. So anyway, I am no Kathleen Kennedy apologist, but what I am is somebody who has been ensconced in the industry for a long time, and I like to see respect given to where it is due. And it is frustrating. I was on a podcast last night where I was arguing about this very thing. And it is a very different thing, a very different world when you're watching a movie as to when you're making a movie. Watching a film, sometimes the experience of watching the movie itself bears not one lick of similarity to what it was like actually making the film. It's true. I mean, what you guys are watching, what I'm watching when we watch a movie, is a succession of shots that are the culmination of sometimes months, if not years, of pre-production and work. And all of the personnel and all the material and all the sets and all of the production, everything is all there to make these various shots for 12 hours a day. And when those shots are connected, hopefully you get a great movie. Now, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, because there is magic in all of that. But one thing that Kathleen Kennedy has made sure of over the course of her career is she's been involved with a lot of magical projects. And as I said, she's worked for directors not just like Steven Spielberg, but Martin Scorsese, M. Night Shyamalan, David Fincher. There's a lot of other people that she's worked with and for, and that she's hired herself. And remember, The Mandalorian was partly her idea, at least putting Favreau and Dave Filoni together. So this idea that we as Star Wars fans should have made her this lightning rod of hatred bothers me. Now, the question is, perhaps George Lucas did pick her because George Lucas respected her, worked with her, knew her for 30 years before she took over Lucasfilm. Remember, her first job working in 1977-78 with Steven Spielberg on 1941. So they go all the way back to the 70s. Her first producing gig was E.T., not a bad first movie to have on your belt, where she began a long-standing relationship with ILM. So Kathleen Kennedy has also been at the cutting edge of motion picture technology. She's watched it develop. In fact, she probably knows more about it than just about every producer or any producer that's existed, because she's had to deal with ILM from the very beginning of her career, even during 1941. So I just think that she's somebody that is deserving of respect. And while she had, as this article, as Kim Masters pointed out, an impossible task in coming to work for Lucasfilm. And the fact is, she's produced 4 movies, and 75% of those movies grossed over $1 billion, which in anybody's book is amazing. It's amazing. Now, whether she stays with the Star Wars franchise or not, and by the way, if I were her, I mean, what a thankless job. What a thankless job. You can't win, you know? And I understand she actually tried. I just want to point out that she tried to make some really ballsy directing hires, young up and comers. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But you know, she had to watch. I mean, she had, again, as this article points out, probably the hardest job any woman in Hollywood has ever faced at her level, being president of Lucasfilm and executive producing the Star Wars movies. I can't even imagine a more difficult position to be in. And look, I'm no fan of The Force Awakens. I don't blame her. The movie's really well produced, but she didn't write it and she didn't direct it. But I think that you know, she deserves our respect. She deserves the respect of imagination connoisseurs and film fans everywhere. And I just think that there is a lack of understanding of what a producer does in movies. And I think that um, we need to become a little bit more educated before we start making these grand pronouncements about somebody who has been doing a wonderful job bringing us incredible visions for the last, well, 37 years. I mean, that's worth respect. Anyway, that's what I want to say about that. I know that there's a lot of people that have been saying a lot of things, and I see them coming in. And let's jump into that and see what you guys have to say today. Wow. Okay. Josh Rosowskis is here. Hey, Josh. How's it going? Josh says, saying hi and thanks again, Rob, for all the support. Well, for those of you who might not know, Josh Rosowskis just started up a new YouTube show, the Josh Rosowskis Show, and go follow him and give him some love. He also, like, he knows a lot about, I know nothing about pro wrestling, but Josh knows a lot about pro wrestling, but he's also got great opinions for movies, so he can do both. If you're a pro wrestling fan, check out Josh's channel. He just had his birthday too, so happy birthday, Josh. Thanks for supporting my channel. So I'm right back at you, son. Warren Wright is here. I love your show, Rob. I don't always get to chat and usually listen the next morning while I'm at work. I just wanted to send some love, bruh. Well, Warren, that was some love you sent. Thanks, buddy. I do appreciate that. I'm glad you listen at work. It's good to have you here. What a cool name you have, Warren Wright. I mean, not like you could be a politician, or it sounds like one day you're going to be somebody that a bunch of other people report to. I like that. Warren Wright. That's like the name of a character in a movie. I think that's great. JB Bonifacio is here. He says, before you can break the wheel, you have to know what the wheel is and isn't. Filoni and Favreau have shown good wheels, so it should be them driving. See, here's the thing. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni want to make this stuff. They do not want to be president of Lucasfilm. At least I don't think they do. What they want to do is they want to make Star Wars and other movies. I wouldn't be surprised if Favreau directs, an Indiana Jones movie spinoff either. I think he wants to direct a feature film. And why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't you want him to? You know what? I think the odds are pretty good that when they do announce who is directing this Star Wars movie for 2022 that Kevin Feige is overseeing, if I was a betting man, I'd say Jon Favreau is going to direct that movie. But that's just me. And who wouldn't want to do that? Running the show is different than making the show. You need both. You need somebody in place that is a great producer. Whether you liked him or not, Rick Berman made 25 seasons of Star Trek. And yeah, I don't think anybody would say he was not a creative producer. In fact, I'd say people think he was probably too creative and he should have stayed in his lane more. And that might well have been true. But you know what? 25 seasons of Star Trek, 18 years of Star Trek, 4 feature films. My God, he had he certainly wielded his power, but without him, would we have had that much Star Trek? I don't know. Factual Opinion says, finally finished The Next Generation. Time for the Next Generation movies. Unfortunately, Factual Opinion, the Next Generation movies are a mixed bag at best. But I'll be curious to hear what you think about them when you get back. Suthius is here. Hello, Suthius. How are you? Hey, Mr. B, just dropping a line. Good cheers, sir. Well, good cheers to you, Suthius. Every time I see your name, Suthius, there was a movie, not a very good movie, but there was a movie called Slithis, and it was put out on Media Home Entertainment. It was one of the first video cassettes I ever got to bring home. Slithis, and it has a kind of there's a cool monster, a cool man in a suit monster. But every time I see your name, Suthius, I always am reminded of Slithis. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Maybe it's just me. I'm sure you've probably never. Well, maybe you have. I don't know. Maybe somebody said, Suthius, have you ever seen the movie Slithis? Well, let me tell you, it's not a movie you definitely need to see. But if you do a cursory Google search and come up with that VHS box cover, you pretty much will see all you need to see of Slithis. But I want to thank you for sending me a line. Very much appreciate it. Anthony Gonzalez is here. He says, calling it right now, Top Gun will do $1 billion. Well, I have to tell you, I'm really looking forward to dipping my toe back into the danger zone. And I hope they bring Kenny Loggins out of from wherever he is to redo whether they get Harold Faltermeyer back or not. I really want Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross to score Top Gun 2, but they have to update. I want the 9 Inch Nails update into to Danger Zone. And then maybe not Take My Breath Away, or if they're going to do Take My Breath Away, the 9 Inch Nails version of that. I think a 9 Inch Nails version of Take My Breath Away and Danger Zone would just make that movie, take it over the top. I don't know if it's going to make $1 billion. You know why? Because Top Gun came out in 1986. I think it did, 86, right? That was 33 years ago. And I know we all grew up watching it, but I don't know if modern audiences are really going to be as attracted to that as they probably should be. But I hope for Paramount's sake that it makes $1 billion, because Paramount needs a hit that they own, and that's part of their own IP. And I want to see Jim Giannopoulos pull Paramount out of the frying pan and get them all fired up, hopefully with the afterburners of an F-14. But I guess it's F-18s, or no, is it F-22s? Whatever Fs are in Top Gun, I'm looking forward to it. I really do hope we get to see an F-14 flying. I love Tomcats. That's one of the reasons I like Top Gun. When I was building model airplanes as a kid, an F-14 Tomcat, whether it was 148 scale or 124 scale, my favorite airplane, love them. There's a reason why in Macross or Robotech, the Valkyries looked like F-14s, because they were the coolest planes ever. Now, that's not to say I didn't like Phantoms too. I like Phantoms. I like F-15 Eagles. I liked F-16s. It's cool. But, when you were a kid growing up, I mean, Phantoms were big and beefy, but it was the F-14 Tomcat. I think the Phantoms were F-4s. I can't go off on a fighter craft. That's just, you're leading me down a primrose path. But Anthony, hopefully Top Gun will do well. Willow Yang is here. Willow Yang says, I rewatched the opening of Batman v Superman after hearing you rave about it. Why did Jack stay inside of Wayne Tower instead of evacuating with the other employees? Good question. Maybe I don't think he could have anticipated that, that whole building was going to come down, or at least the floors that he was in. But yeah, a little convenient. He should have tried to get out. Maybe he thought he couldn't get out in time. Maybe he thought there was nowhere to go. I don't know. But that's a good question. Did you like it? Did you like that beginning? Piggy66 is here. Piggy66 says, which is your favorite David Lynch film or character? I dig Bobby Peru from Wild at Heart. He's a total perv, especially in the famous scene with Laura Dern. Well, that's a rando question. I probably liked Blue Velvet's probably my favorite David Lynch movie. And I would say Jeffrey, the Kyle MacLachlan character, because I identified with him. He knows he's gotten into something that's kind of weird, and he wants to stick around and watch just how weird it gets. He hides in that closet, spies on Isabella Rossellini. I don't know if I would have done that, but, I think you can't be a film fan without being sort of a voyeur in a certain way. So I would say that's probably my favorite David Lynch movie. But you know what? I really love Mulholland Drive, and I really love Fire Walk with Me, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I love Wild at Heart. I own all of these movies. But I think his best movie is still The Elephant Man, but it's not necessarily, the subject matter attracted him, obviously, but as far as Lynchian-isms go, or Lynchian, just being Lynchian, I think that the Elephant Man, the subject matter is very Lynchian, but the movie itself is just, it's classically made and beautifully done, and I really liked it a lot. Stubble McShave says, when you talk about producers, I think of Wag the Dog. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, Dustin Hoffman is doing an impression of our favorite producer, Robert Evans, who just passed away. And if you haven't seen Wag the Dog, yes, sir, Dustin Hoffman is playing that to the hilt, and there absolutely. And another movie that I really love that deals pretty well with producers is The Player. Robert Altman's The Player, and I was talking about Richard E. Grant. That's life. That's reality. He's in The Player, and he plays a character named Tom. And I love Richard E. Grant, The Player, but The Player is a pretty good look at Hollywood. And there's a couple of other good producers in movies. There's a good producer and all that jazz. And of course, another one of my favorite movies about making movies, which is Richard Rush's The Stuntman. If you haven't seen The Stuntman, it's a great movie about making movies and the attraction of movies. This is one of two. Warren Wright says, The Mandalorian and World of Warcraft. Not sure if you're a player of the game, but I have to say I love the resemblance, the questing, the side quests, the boss quests, the armor upgrades, the training to ride a mount, the planet he's on in episode 2, Barrens, so many similarities. Well, Warren, I think you're actually onto something there. A lot of people said that it resembles an episode of animation, but I think you're right. Now, I've only played World of Warcraft a couple of times because I could see myself getting sucked into that game. I haven't played a lot of MMORPGs. I like what I saw though, and I definitely can see where you're coming from. I think it's a very astute observation. As a matter of fact, that's a structure that you can pin a show on. What you're just describing. The boss quests, the side quests, the actual overall quests, and the training, and acquiring that armor. And you're absolutely right. I think you're definitely onto something there. Definitely onto something there. Rick Berg says Kathleen Kennedy is a CEO of Lucasfilm Corporation, i.e., Lucasfilm, ILM, Skywalker Sound, etc., and it is her job to do that and be in business with Disney, Pixar, Marvel. A responsibility is untold, and she is doing her job. Rick, thank you for saying that. I very much appreciate you coming along and saying that, because it really, look, we live in a world now where, and I've existed in this world, traversed the fan world and the professional world my entire adult life. When I was writing for Sci-Fi Universe magazine, that was published by Larry Flint in the 90s. I was the critic at large. I wrote op-ed pieces. I wrote reviews. Then, I was just, I don't know if you know, but I found a couple more episodes of SF Vortex that I was on, a Sci-Fi Channel show, and I was in the War Room. I was a recurring pundit on TV talking about matters of the day. On my channel, you can see me and Eric Wallace, who's the current executive producer of The Flash, talking to Mark DePay about his movie Spawn. And we didn't like it. And it is called The War Room, and he wasn't happy. And I feel bad. There are a few things that I feel truly guilty about in my adult life. I feel guilty about going off on Mark DePay now that I know more about making movies. I hadn't directed then. I hadn't produced a movie then. And we were, I think, unnecessarily cruel. Well, at least I was. So Mark DePay, I apologize for being mean about Spawn. I didn't like your movie very much, but I could have been a little bit more tactful in terms of my response. Anyway, but it's very interesting. So I've been talking about these things for a long time, and I have a lot of healthy respect for people that have longevity in the business. And Kathleen Kennedy is somebody that absolutely deserves all of our respect. And I don't like the fact that our fan community, imagination connoisseurs, are suddenly pillorying her in over the internet and saying that she's ruined everything. We're good at that. We're good at telling people how much they've ruined things, but we're not so good at telling people when they've made things that are kick-ass and awesome. And if more than anything, I want this channel, as most of you have known or are aware, I champion the idea that things are awesome and that we're getting a lot of great stuff these days. Piggy66 says, not sure the Filoni-Favreau pairing was such a great idea. Mandalorian feels too much like a cartoon, and it's not gritty at all, likely due to the Filoni influence. That remains to be seen. It really does remain to be seen. I mean, I do think that it's a little gritty. Those poor Jawas would tell you it's a little gritty. The fact that we got to see Who Wants to Disintegrate Jawas, man, it's too bad. that the Jawas got disintegrated. And we'll see where it goes. But I really like the casting, and I think it's still early yet. There's still 6 more episodes of The Mandalorian. By the way, the next episode of The Mandalorian drops at midnight tonight. Yo, you gonna stay up and watch? I have to watch either tonight or tomorrow morning because we'll talk about it on the Campia show. But I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. Where's it going to go now? Is Baby Yoda really Baby Yoda? Is he a clone? Why is one of the doctors in the show wearing the insignias of the cloners from Camino? I don't know. We'll see. You might be right about that, Piggy 66. I'm not sure, but we'll see. I mean, it's still pretty cool. What we're seeing is still pretty cool. Suthius says, being half facetious here, I bet there wouldn't be this much grief or outcry if Kathleen Kennedy was a Ken Kennedy and had a manhood. Yep, just saying. Suthius, I don't know. I know it's so easy to point fingers, but I think there is a bit of an element of truth. I think with all the other things that are going on, I was having a conversation yesterday that a lot of people do believe she has a feminist agenda that she wants to be pushing. But it's very funny because at the same time, they talk about how she's not a creative producer, and yet she's pushing a feminist agenda in these movies. So she's creative enough that she's going to push a feminist agenda. She's going to make a major motion picture studio put their agenda. Look, Disney's agenda is not pushing any kind of politics. As a matter of fact, they're exactly the opposite. They want their material to appeal to all sides of the political spectrum, which is interesting because when you're dealing with a movie like Star Wars, where the rebels are fighting against an evil galactic empire, that's pretty political. But they want to make sure that it appeals to everyone. So I don't think that there's a feminist agenda afoot. When Kathleen Kennedy wore the Force's female shirts, those were Nike shirts. They were made by Nike. They weren't even about Star Wars. She found them and wore them. And what is wrong with women celebrating their successes in an industry that has not been traditionally full of women? I mean, as I always say on the show, the perspective that women have, the voices that women have are only going to eventually make our storytelling better. Yes, I said it. And we're in the middle of a shakeout period, and I'm really curious. I mean, I'll flat out be honest. When I was reading, I've said this before, when I was reading horror fiction, I read a lot of horror fiction. I wasn't a big fan of a lot of the female horror writers because they were dealing more with emotional aspects of horror as opposed to, say, plot. Well, what I realized as I read more female horror writers, like people like Kathy Koja, Nancy Collins, that I just had to sort of acclimate to the way they were writing. They were just doing something that I was familiar with in a different way, and in a more interesting way in certain respects. And I think, as I always say on this show, the more we hear the voices of different people, whether they're different colors, different ethnicities, we're just going to be better off in the long run, because at first everybody's going to be like, yay, I have a voice now, and let me tell you everything that's been on my mind. Well, we're going to have to live through all that. So we're going to get a lot of stories that might not be what they should be. But when it all shakes out, we're going to be richer for it because we're going to have more diversity amongst the kinds of stories that we're listening to or hearing about. I mean, I remember when I started reading Octavia Butler, who is a Black female science fiction writer who sadly passed away after we did an interview with her that was going to be on the Chronicles of Narnia special features for Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But sadly, we were never allowed to complete the piece that we were doing by Disney, which was unfortunate. But I remember reading her work and thinking, wow, it's very interesting. I wish I had encountered a Black female science fiction writer before this. But I hadn't. But upon reading Octavia Butler's work, I was a better man. So I think that you might be right about that. And I do hear it's such a strange thing to me. I mean, and I'm not saying that everybody that dislikes Kathleen Kennedy is somehow a misogynist, because I don't think that's true either. But look, people forget how much people hated George Lucas after the prequels, or especially after Phantom Menace. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a time in fandom up until The Last Jedi where Star Wars fans were so disillusioned. And it was funny because I was more disillusioned by The Phantom Menace than I was by Last Jedi. I was even having a conversation, and I've said this before. I think what Luke Skywalker does at The Last Jedi, the final battle, is one of the most baller Jedi things you can possibly do. You know, you learn that Jedis are supposed to use the Force for defense, never for attack. Well, what is Luke doing? He's at a battle, but he's not even really there. How much baller can you get? That's the most baller Jedi move ever. And so for me, it didn't bother me that Luke Skywalker was in a bad place. That's what happens to people. They get old, they get disillusioned. All of their what bothered me about The Force Awakens and why I thought that this new sequel trilogy has been mostly disappointing and has not lived up to expectations is, especially if you watch Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens right after one another, as Elizabeth was doing the other day, when you get to the end of Jedi and you turn on Force Awakens, you're like, wait, what? They just defeated the Empire. And now in the next movie, there's the First Order and the Resistance? What? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And I know the Mandalorian's we're gonna see a little bit about the First Order. They're gonna fill all that in, but it does seem a little weird. I think at the end of this trilogy, what it should have been, or what the sequel trilogy should have done, and I've said it a million times, give us an adventure with our classic cast, and that'll be their last hurrah. We never even got to see Han Solo, Princess Leia, and Luke in the same Millennium Falcon cockpit together with Chewie and R2 and 3PO. I mean, they're never together. They brought all the characters back and they never put those characters together. That to me was a mistake. And that's where they really, dropped the ball. That and doing R2-D2 dirty. Anyway, but you might be right, Suthius. Chris Parsons is here and says, I wish episode 9 ends like episode 1 and episode 4. Fingers crossed. Well, we shall see. I don't know if there's going to be a big party in the galaxy. I don't know if there should be. Billions of people died in Force Awakens. And we'll see. Dan V900 is here and says, JJ was asked by Rolling Stone about the lack of Luke, Leia, and Han. It certainly could have been their story, but it felt like the way to use them was to be in support of a new story. All I can say is that the main characters in this trilogy felt naturally connected to those characters that came before. Dan says, I strongly disagree. I strongly disagree too. And you know what the problem was? I mean, if you ask J.J. Abrams who Jason Solo was or who Mara Jade was, he wouldn't know. And maybe if he'd read those books, he would have thought to himself, wow, there's a lot of great ideas there. There's a lot of great characters. So much work has already been done. But look, J.J. Abrams, it's all business. It ain't show friends, it's show business. And your friends are Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, R2, 3PO, Lando. Those are your friends. But somebody else created those characters. Somebody else is getting the marketing cheddar when they sell, or the money when they sell those characters, when they make toys out of those characters. So it didn't make sense to bring back characters. If you're a writer and you're a writer-director, why would you what is the incentive to bring back old characters? Everybody wants to create their own new characters and put their own stamp, their own imprintur on something. I get it. I totally get it. But you know what? Again, I bring it up all the time. Look at Creed. To me, Creed was the way to do things correctly. It's the 6th Rocky sequel, and you have new characters that are totally based on what came before. There's a direct linkage. Adonis Creed is Apollo Creed's son. We still have Rocky Balboa. If you want to treat something, I mean, Creed to me, that's why Kevin Feige tapped Ryan Coogler to make Black Panther. I keep saying these things, but you're probably all sick of hearing it, but it's true. And I agree. I disagree with what JJ was saying. I'm like, how do you bring back all of your characters and have Luke Skywalker in the last 2 minutes of the movie? I don't understand that. And what's really interesting is all the stuff like that we saw in Last Jedi, for instance, where Luke felt the dark side and Kylo Ren. Why wasn't that all part of the movie? Why wasn't the formation, the resistance? Suddenly the First Order shows up from the Outer Rim. That's what the movie's about. The whole galaxy has been going along for 30 years. Luke's training Jedi. Everything is hunky-dory. And then boom, fleets of Star Destroyers show up full of troops that have been training for the last 30 years. These people are ready. They sweep in and they start to take over. And war breaks out again. And you realize the Emperor wasn't dead. That sounds cool. I'd see those 3 movies. Could be badass, but we'll never know. But I agree with you. I don't think the new characters feel connected to the characters that came before at all. Warren Wright is back. Warren Wright says, thanks for the nice comment on my name. My wife tells me she married me for my last name. As a teacher, her kids call her Mrs. Wright. Happy wife. Well, yes, in case, how sneaky. You marry a woman that takes your last name and your last name is Wright. So for the rest of her life, she's Mrs. Wright, not Mrs. Wrong. Kudos to her. She knew what she was doing. And you know what? How funny to have a teacher named Mrs. Wright. I think that's very funny. I'm sure the jokes are never ending. Herman Muller is here. Herman Muller says, wondering if you think Kevin Feige working with Kathleen Kennedy is a way of passing on his experiences in developing a cinematic universe. He probably has, here's the difference. Here's what I think Kevin Feige has that Kathleen Kennedy does not. Kathleen Kennedy is not a fan, nor does Kathleen Kennedy have an intimate understanding of fandom. She understands there are fans out there, but she doesn't know what it means to be a fan. Kevin Feige was a fan that's made that crossover and has become a professional. And that is his greatest strength. There's never really been fans of Kevin Feige's ilk who have crossed over. We've got people, Jon Favreau's a fan, certainly. And Dave Filoni's a fan too. And there's a lot of people in various aspects of the industry that have made that crossover and they've been successful. There's not many of them because fandom is traditionally frowned upon by the powers that be. Certainly was during Star Trek. Ron Moore couldn't tell people what a fan he was of the original Star Trek series when he was hired on the 3rd season of Next Gen. So he couldn't do that. But I think it's interesting, but I don't think Kathleen Kennedy is a true producer. She likes to work with creative visionaries. She expects the people she works with to be creative visionaries and go do the job that they're hired to do. I think the real problem is that Kathleen Kennedy ended up working with people nowadays, and this is I'm not disparaging anyone, filmmakers that are working today. But the people that are working, remember, Steven Spielberg was walking on the Universal lot, sneaking on the Universal lot when he was 20 years old and started directing television when he was 21. And he cut his teeth on that. Then he made the Sugarland Express, Jaws, and Close Encounters before he ever worked with Kathleen Kennedy. So he was somebody that cut his teeth, learned production, worked his way up, made the Sugarland Express, made Jaws, which, by the way, if anybody knows about the production of Jaws, talk about a trial by fire. I mean, Steven Spielberg was basically thrown off a cliff, set on fire, and no one knew what the hell was going to happen. I mean, the studio wanted to fire him, and producer David Brown was smart. Producer David Brown told Spielberg, just keep shooting. And Jaws came out, and it all came out all right. It's funny that Kathleen Kennedy met Spielberg on what was at the time his one big disappointment. 1941. So, I think that I think Kathleen Kennedy, if I were her, she's been at Lucasfilm since 2012. Her contract's up in 2021. That's almost a decade. She has nothing to apologize for. If she wants to leave, if Rise of Skywalker is a hit, she's got 5 hits under her belt. I would imagine Rise of Skywalker, unless it's look, it is not going to be the dumpster fire that everybody thinks it's going to be. It is a movie that has more expectations on it, I think, than any movie in pretty much history. And there's been a lot of people who've had to weigh in, but we'll see. I think the movie is going to surprise people. I'm hoping it's good. I certainly have my tickets to see the first show at the Chinese Theater. The big ground zero for Star Wars back in 1977 was the Chinese Theater. I lived in Seattle. I was 10, so I wasn't there, but I'm going. Elizabeth and I and Sophie and Bill Hunt, we're going. We got good seats. We're going to the Chinese theater where Star Wars began. And we're going to see The Rise of Skywalker on the 19th. And I, for one, at 6 p.m., I am very excited. And, I've been excited about Star Wars for 42 years. And I even like the prequels more than I used to. One day I will have a Count Dooku hot toy that I'm slowly paying off. And I'm very excited. So there you go. But I think you're right. I think Kathleen Kennedy, she can hold her head high and go produce more movies. Hopefully, maybe one day she could produce a movie I'll make, because that would be amazing. I can't imagine how much she has to teach me if that would ever happen. Probably won't ever happen, but it could. You never know. We shall see. Suthia says, it has to be a two-way street. If you can dish on something, you can also praise it. Example, I am tough and stern on my boys, but I also show affection. Suthius, that is exactly what a good parent should do. Be stern, but also show affection. Because kids got to learn, man. And today, with all the input kids are getting from every direction, it's better to be stern. Of course, that's easy for me to say. I don't have kids, but it's nice to hear from you that things are going well. Echo Base Network is here. Echo Base says, thanks for your feedback on our intro last night. Very interesting. Echo Base Network is working on a documentary about, I guess, from what I saw, fans and this new sequel trilogy. Narrated by Doomcock. I think it's going to be good. And I saw the intro for it. It was good. As I said to Echo Base Network last night, I thought it relied a little too heavily on Return of the Jedi. And by the way, the secret to cutting great montages, especially if you're cutting montages from like a Star Trek or Star Wars, is to try and never use consecutive shots and use as many different shots from as many different things as possible. One of the things I really liked doing when I was working on the Star Trek The Next Generation documentaries is when I got into them, all of my documentaries would start or have a montage from that season, like season 2. And I took a long time. I picked a shot out from every episode of the season. Star Trek had, for 6 seasons, The Next Generation had 26 episodes, and in season 2, it had 22 because of the writer's strike. No one ever commented on this, and I don't know if anybody was paying attention, but it mattered to me. So there you go. Echo Base Network says Star Wars did not make almost $5 billion because of Kathleen Kennedy. No, I don't think it did, but she was instrumental in making sure that Lucasfilm was a successful entity, and she was the executive producer, and she was put in place. I mean, here's the thing: she was put in place by George Lucas to do the job, handpicked by the creator of Star Wars, not handpicked by Bob Iger, as that article said. And I think that's important to remember. Echo Base says it made it on the Star Wars name alone. Well, that's true, but the new movies far outgrossed what Phantom Menace did. And I think, yes, you have Disney. It's a different time. You have 2 generations, another 20 years of people loving Star Wars, and no one had seen a new Star Wars movie for 10 years. So it was primed to be successful. But yes, you're right about that. I think that the Star Wars name carries a lot of weight. But let's remember, while I might not have liked Force Awakens, a lot of people did, and it way outperformed. It was anomalous. The fact that it grossed. Here's another thing that really bothers me. The Force Awakens making $2 billion was anomalous. No one ever thought it would make $1 billion. There was no indicators that it was going to do that. No one thought it was going to make that much money, because that's crazy. Star Wars never made that much money, but the fact that it made not just $1 billion, but $2 billion is huge. That was a big deal. And everybody involved with that rollout had something to do with it. It wasn't just the name Star Wars. I mean, just the name Star Wars didn't help Attack of the Clones, even though I have to say, I've never disliked Attack of the Clones. People are always talking about how much they hated Attack of the Clones. I like stuff in Attack of the Clones. There's lots of good stuff to like. I like the chase through the skies of Coruscant. What is it? Is it Zam Wesell, the bounty hunter? You know what? I've got an action figure of her. I keep forgetting that I've got a box full. I'm so focused on my Hot Toys figures. I got a box full of Kenner 12-inch Star Wars figures that are pretty dope too. I have Captain Tarples riding. It's crazy. I don't know why I'm thinking about that, but I do. I should open that stuff up. I haven't seen that in 15 years. But you're right, Echo Base. Star Wars, the name, carries a lot of weight, but that doesn't guarantee huge success. And I think that everybody had a hand in it. And certainly Kathleen Kennedy brought J.J. Abrams on board. She worked closely with her creatives, as a good group of people does. And you know what? And by the way, Kathleen Kennedy as a producer also surmounted difficulties. I mean, people blame the fact that Lord and Miller were not making the Solo movie that they were supposed to make, or that they thought they were going to make. But Kathleen Kennedy made a really tough decision. It was not easy to stop that far into production and make a replacement and find Ron Howard. That was not, as a matter of fact, that was probably one of the hardest things she's ever had to do in her life. And while Solo, I think, was ill-conceived from the get-go, because if they had made an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie instead with Ewan McGregor, there would still be Star Wars stories being made. Doing Rogue One and following it up with Obi-Wan Kenobi. The real problem with Solo is, no, it could have been the greatest movie in the world, but Alden Ehrenreich playing Han Solo was never going to fly, ever. It was never going to fly. And I think that idea was misplaced from the get, especially right after you've already seen Han Solo play. Harrison Ford play Han Solo for a last time. You're watching this movie where the central character, as good as Donald Glover was as Lando, and I liked a lot of the characters, Woody Harrelson. There's some great action set pieces in the movie. It doesn't feel authentic, because the man playing Han Solo, as I thought the performance was good, isn't Han Solo. Rogue One, all new cast of characters. And you get to see Tarkin, Leia, and Vader. And then, of course, if you'd followed that up with a Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, and they were going to make one. They've retooled the movie that they were going to make, and they've turned that into the series they're going to shoot. That's why Ewan McGregor knew it was going to get made for 3 years. It was supposed to get made 3 years ago. So Jay Canada's here. Hey, Rob, another great show. Speaking of the new Top Gun, I think Joseph Kosinski would be a great choice to direct a Star Wars film. First of all, thanks for the compliment, Jay. Joseph Kosinski has left me. I think he creates beautiful images, and he's got a great design sense and a great eye. I don't yet know if he's a great storyteller. I think Top Gun, obviously, Tom Cruise works with people he has great respect for. And Joseph Kosinski would not be directing Top Gun if Tom Cruise did not have a great experience working with him on Oblivion. And I think Oblivion is a very respectable science fiction film. I quite like Oblivion, actually. I think it has a really unique look. And if it was a movie that was made in the 1970s, it would probably be considered and revered now as one of the great science fiction films. But now, there's a lot in Oblivion we've seen before, but I like it a lot. Tron Legacy, I thought, to be honest, huge disappointment for me. There's a lot I like about it, but I just don't think it holds together. And I don't necessarily know if I blame Kosinski for that. It's a great looking movie. Give it up for hiring Daft Punk to do the soundtrack, but we'll see if Kosinski has the goods. I mean, Top Gun Maverick certainly looks dope. I can't wait to see it. I'm very excited, but I hope it doesn't suffer the same fate as Terminator. I hope it has. I hope Top Gun does not have a dark fate unto itself. See what I did there? But we'll see. Who knows? Loquacious Primate is here. Loquacious Primate says, I think a lot of fandom has turned on Kathleen Kennedy, less because of agenda and more because creatives at Lucasfilm have taken shots at fans, and she seems fine with it. I think you have a good point there, Loquacious Primate. By the way, Loquacious Primate is a great name. I love that. I think you might be right about that. And, the relationship that fans have, Rick Berman once said something on our interviews. He said, the internet was created by pornography and Star Trek. because when the internet was new, people were either looking at porn or they were talking about Star Trek. And he was absolutely right. Now, where we are with the internet, how much blood is spilled talking about not just Star Wars or Star Trek or comic books. I mean, the internet, we're all nerds, or I like to say imagination connoisseurs, and we were all the early adopters of computers. And then your parents, if your parents were nerdy, you were born into nerd land, and you were on a computer from the time you probably could speak. So the relationship that fans have now, that fandom has with their properties, when you can deliver instant feedback, when creators are online and saying things. I mean, we've never had it better. And I think on one hand, I mean, look what Ron Moore did. He pioneered it with Star Trek. Ron Moore was on various forums talking to people about Star Trek The Next Generation episodes right after they aired. He certainly was active again in terms of Battlestar Galactica. I mean, Ron Moore really pioneered the idea of entertainment industry, or genre professionals, people that were working in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, talking back to the audience. And that wasn't even, we weren't even capable of that until the internet came out. And I think you're right. I think you definitely have a point. But Kathleen Kennedy, it's not her job to service the fan base. It's her job to run Lucasfilm. And as somebody so eloquently pointed out earlier on in the chat, I don't think Kathleen Kennedy's fine with it. It's just that with running ILM and Lucasfilm and The Mandalorian and Star Wars movies and trying to do all of these things, there's, by the way, there is no way that you can satisfy the fan base. There's no way. Just look at Star Trek Discovery. Or better yet, don't. But there's no way you can service a fan base, because even the fan base is fractured, because you have different generations of fans. Like myself, OG, original geek here. I mean, I was bummed out by Star Wars when the prequels came out. I have come to embrace them as not good movies, but good Star Wars. But there are people whose first experience with Star Wars was The Phantom Menace. There are people, I know it's hard to believe, that love Jar Jar Binks. So even the fan communities are split. They're completely bifurcated. So if they were supposed to more than bifurcated, they're split into a million little pieces. So who is Kathleen Kennedy supposed to listen to? The fans that like new Star Wars, and there are a lot of them. The fans that are disgruntled. Which fan base do you listen to? Where do you go? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's a tough one. I think really she should just listen to me. I think all of fandom should talk to Kathleen Kennedy through me. And you know what? I am willing for all of you imagination connoisseurs out there, for every member of the Post-Geek Singularity community, I am willing to be your representative, your go-between. If you want one, you just tell the world that Robert Meyer Burnett, the host of Robservations, should be the fan ambassador to Kathleen Kennedy, because I am perfectly willing to accept that mantle of responsibility. So there you go. But I think you're probably right about that, loquacious primate. Dieter Bastian is here. Hello, Dieter. Longtime supporter of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Good to have you here, Dieter. Rob, stop your work on Tango Shalom immediately and finish the Snyder Cut first. We all know you've been secretly editing it. # release the Snyder Cut. Well, Dieter, again, I am perfectly willing to accept the mantle of that responsibility. If they need a post-production supervisor, I would be willing to work for a small weekly stipend, and I would make sure that the Snyder Cut gets out to all of us, because I would like to see it. I'm dubious. Look, here's the problem. There is no finished version of the Snyder Cut. There isn't. When I told people, when I saw Return of the King for the first time, I was in Peter Jackson's house. That's true. I'm not just name dropping. We were working on the Two Towers Blu-ray, and we saw a cut of Return of the King. It was probably, none of it. It was nowhere. We watched it from beginning to end. There was not one thing in it that didn't need to be addressed. Color timing, the live action combined with visual effects. So you could watch it. You could absolutely watch it from beginning to end, and we did. But it was light years from being releasable. And I'm sure that the Snyder Cut is the same way. It's further along. There's a lot of finished effects and things like that. And there's probably, they might have even locked picture. but it's far cry from being ready to be consumed by the public. What I've learned is it doesn't matter how people are. They're like, oh yes, I know how to watch a movie without it being totally finished. Nope. I've been so disappointed by, oh no, people really, you'll finish a movie, you'll show it to people, and they're like, they'll raise their hand and they'll be like, hey, the color looked a little off in that shot. Are you going to fix that? This is, of course, coming after you've made a speech. The color timing is not done yet, so you're going to notice some irregularities. We're going to fix all that. The first question that'll happen if you do a Q&A after it to get your movie judged, somebody will tell you, the color looked off. And you're like, yep. It happens every time. So unless the Snyder Cut is completely finished and up to snuff, I would not release it. And I'm willing to bet you I know nothing about it. I don't know how far along it is. I haven't seen it. I haven't heard from anybody, any third parties, but I'll bet you they need at least $50 million to finish that movie. And the problem is, where's that $50 million going to come from? Unless I think that, look, I've said before that I think HBO Max, they could do far worse than to have the Snyder Cut come out, pay the money to finish it. And better yet, I would go in and I would ask Zack Snyder, who did 3 versions of Watchmen for Warner Brothers, the theatrical version, the director's cut, and then the ultimate cut. He's already done 3 cuts of his own movie. I would go in and I would have him re-edit Man of Steel. Not that it needs to be re-edited, but I'll bet there's things he'd want to do to it. And I like the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman a great deal more than the theatrical version. But still, it's got problems. But I enjoy it for what it is. And go finish Justice League and call it, Zack Snyder's whatever you want to call it, his trilogy, his Superman, Man of Steel trilogy, whatever. Because I think if they make another movie, the Justice League is not going to be the Justice League as we saw them in that first one, which is too bad. But look, I would love to see the Snyder Cut. I'm not a Zack Snyder hater. I'm not a lover of Zack Snyder. I don't like everything he does. I don't think he's any great intellect, but I think that he's able to take the comic book page and bring it to life the way almost nobody can. The problem is he doesn't adapt it enough. He just recreates it. And I think that's his biggest problem. But there's a lot, Batman v Superman, the ultimate cut, there's a lot of stuff in that movie to like. I think it's overstuffed, but it's in terms of the imagery and stuff, there's some great stuff in there. Rick Berg says Solo should have been about an adventure, not about his beginning, like Brian Daley. Rick, again, we park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay, my friend. What Rick is referring to is Brian Daley, who incidentally wrote the screenplays for the NPR radio adaptation of Star Wars, wrote 3 Han Solo books. And Han Solo at Star's End. Hang on. Let me find out, because I wanted to know about this yesterday. Let's see. Just because I keep forgetting the names of them. Yes. Well, I guess they're called the Han Solo Adventures now, which is, so there's Han Solo at Star's End, Han Solo's Revenge, and Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, which is fine. But you know what? I still like Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, or the Flame Winds of Ocean, maybe better. But who knows? I read all those books. I got them from the Science Fiction Book Club, actually. And I read them. I like them. And I think you're right. I think if they made a young Han Solo movie that didn't delve into his origin, but instead went into because I don't like, again, it was the same thing with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's like the pre-title sequence when they're going after the Cross of Coronado. It's like, well, Indiana Jones became Indiana Jones in one day. He got the scar on his chin. He developed a fear of snakes in one afternoon. I hate that. And they did a lot of that with Solo. And I think you're right. I mean, it was kind of nice seeing him. Okay, he's in the Imperial Army now, or the whatever. And I do think that just a standard adventure would have made a better movie. I totally agree with you. But I think Solo is perfectly serviceable. I don't dislike it. I don't think it's necessarily great, but I don't dislike it. Now I'm going to read a letter. Yes, I haven't read any letters yet, and this show's gone on for a while. I have to get off soon. I mean, I have to get off this chat soon. I know Vesna and Willow are chuckling right now. Dear Mr. Burnett, this one comes from Darren McKinnon. Actually, it doesn't come from Darren McKinnon because I read that letter. I'm not doing a very good job. Not doing a very good job. And I'm going to read this because I like this. Ian Samuels wrote in a letter, and he wrote this a while ago, but I hadn't read it. But I like this letter because it's always good to talk about stuff. So Ian Samuels says, hello, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. Many of us members, and of course Rob, are aware of the attempted Star Trek sequel series or spin-off Phase 2. But there is another little-known attempted spin-off written by Gene Roddenberry. Way back in 1966, Roddenberry presented to the network Assignment Earth, a script for a pilot for a spin-off series from Star Trek. Assignment Earth would have cameo appearances from Kirk and Spock, but the main character is named Gary Seven, as played by Robert Lansing, who had been a regular on the series such as 87th Precinct, The Man Who Never Was, and 12 O'Clock High, as well as starring in an episode of The Twilight Zone, and he went on to co-star in Automan and Kung Fu, The Legend Continues. The premise of this series has Gary Seven travel into the past to stop the human race from destroying themselves and instead improve themselves to ensure that the Star Trek version of the future happens. Due to the pilot not being picked up by the studio, the script was reworked and ended up being the final episode of the second season of Star Trek. Goes to show that even on early Roddenberry had it goes to show that even early on, Gene Roddenberry had ideas of spinning the series into other directions. Good to be back. Well, Ian, it's good to have you back. First of all, I don't believe that an Assignment Earth TV series was ever shot. They never shot a pilot for it. The episode itself was the pilot. And for those, Ian is correct. The last episode of the second season of Star Trek was called Assignment Earth, and it was what's called a backdoor pilot. And they made the show, and they introduced Gary Seven, and they introduced his secretary, Roberta Lincoln, played by the delightful Terry Garr, who later went on to play Roy Neary, Richard Dreyfuss's wife, in Close Encounters, and she was delightful as Dustin Hoffman's friend in the movie Tootsie. I'm a huge fan. She was in a lot of other things in the 70s as well. She had great comic timing. She was delightful. I love Terry Garr. And I believe she suffered from MS later in her life. But yes, Assignment Earth was a backdoor pilot. And by the way, it's a great episode of Star Trek, I think. And of course, there's Isis the Cat. And John Byrne did a series of comics for IDW where, and of course, Gary Seven appears in Greg Cox's Khan Noonan's The Eugenics Wars novels. And he's a character that Star Trek fans have embraced. And lately, over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of Gary Seven stuff brought back and used. And it was great. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Star Trek has an interesting, if you haven't read, there's a great book that the Reeve Stevens wrote called Star Trek: The Lost Years, or the Lost Series. And Mark Altman and Ed Gross also wrote a book about the Lost Years. But the Star Trek, there were two things that were moving along in the 70s at Paramount before Star Trek the Motion Picture was made. The first was the feature film Planet of Titans that was going to be directed by Philip Kaufman, who later went on to direct Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Henry and June, and of course The Right Stuff. And that never got made. And Toshiro Mifune was going to play a Klingon in that. And you see the design of the Star Trek, the Discovery of in Star Trek Discovery, that design was derived from Ralph McQuarrie, yes, of Star Trek fame. Ralph McQuarrie had done some pre-production work on Planet of the Titans and designed a ship that Brian Fuller was going to use in Star Trek Discovery. So that's why the Discovery looks the way it looks. Ralph McQuarrie and, of course, the Ken Adam, the great production designer who worked with Stanley Kubrick and the James Bond films, was the production designer on Planet of the Titans, but it was scuttled. Unfortunately, it never got made. Then they were in pre-production for the Star Trek Phase 2 TV series. That's where they found Persis Kambata. 13 scripts were commissioned, and they scuttled that series after the success of Star Wars and decided to turn Star Trek Phase 2 into a movie. You can see footage from Phase 2 on the DVD of Star Trek The Motion Picture, or if you watch my Season 2 documentary on The Next Generation Season 2, I used all of the footage that I could find in the Paramount archives, the test footage that was shot on the bridge set they built for Star Trek Phase 2. So that is interesting. But then, yes, Assignment Earth was actually the first, I think it was the first proposed Star Trek spinoff, which would have been pretty interesting. I mean, to watch Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln sort of traverse Earth during that time, I guess it would have been what Torchwood is to Doctor Who. I mean, because Captain Jack is, of course, an alien, and Robert Lansing was a human that was taken by aliens, but it could have been interesting. I mean, the comics are interesting. I like what John Byrne did, and I think Gary Seven's a great character. So that's a cool thing, Ian, to mention that. It's always good to talk about these kinds of things. And yeah, I think that would have been very enjoyable to see that show actually happen. And it's too bad it did not. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of Robservations episode number 281. And I want to thank all of my moderators. I want to thank Louis Yu and Jordy Lyons, our new moderators. And of course, Greg Smith, who's here, who builds houses with his hands. And of course, Detective Jim. It's always good to have Detective Jim here, swinging the band hammer on people that are breaking the law. And finally, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, who is in and out of here, but he is, of course, reelected to be the mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. It's good to have him around, and I'm sure he will be back. I know he's at a conference today. But most of all, it's best to have you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity, you imagination connoisseurs who make my day better. Hopefully, I will be able to acquire some headphones. I'll get them either off Amazon or at Best Buy, because it's hard to do the show without headphones. Anyway, I want to thank everybody who supports the show. And remember, we are continuing our Lucky Tiger giveaways until Christmas. We're giving away a bottle of their head to tail body wash for anybody. All you have to do, but you have to live in North America, but all you have to do is go to the website, punch in, just write anything. Go to my website, not their website. Go to the Burnettwork.net. Just write any comment on anything, and you can read, or you might be able to win. What you can read, I'll tell you what you can read, our columnist, Allie State, who writes the Feminerd Gaze. Her second column goes up tomorrow, and it's all about why we need Raylo. Yes, folks, why we need Raylo. I don't necessarily think I personally need Raylo, but Allie State has, she has a great love for Kylo Ren, and she's obviously a shipper. So her article is fun to read. That will be also up on the Burnettwork.net website. And by the way, if you comment on her article, you are entered in for the drawing. So thank you all for being here. Write me letters, send them to me at the Burnettwork.net. Join up, become a member of the Post-Geek Singularity. You can do it for $1 a year on the website. I want to thank you for everybody who continues to support this channel. And by the way, I think, ladies and gentlemen, come Monday, it's going to be early. I was going to do it on my 300th episode, but I think Rob Burnett is going to kick up Robservations as I talk about myself in the third person, which is really weird. Didn't mean to say that, but it's weird. Is going to kick this show into high gear, moving to a new set, moving into the Imaginarium, going to have multiple camera angles, going to have graphics, music. I'm telling you, going to have guests. I'll have the ability to have guests. It'll be like Joe Rogan, but the geeky Joe Rogan with action figures. Anyway, that's coming. So thank you all for being here. And I want to say and remind you that, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you got to do is listen. Oh, and one more thing. If you like these chats, please hit like, please subscribe, please tell your friends, please share them, please put them into playlists, all that stuff, because the YouTube, the whatever apocalypse is coming, the Copa apocalypse, COPPA apocalypse. I'm not worried. These chats are not made for kids. They're made for the kid in all of us. So thanks very much for being here. And as always, have a better day.